Before starting with the presentation, we have a very diverse audience coming from all over the world. And I would like to ask you a series of quick questions. So it's also to wake everybody up after the good lunch. So I want you to raise your hand if you have heard before about transit-oriented development. And I would expect everybody more or less to raise their hand. Okay. Now, I would like you to raise your hand if you have been working on TOD and you're in the middle of trying to implement a TOD project. Okay, so already we have lost half of the members. Now I would like to ask you a more tricky question, whether you have been working on TOD, you have been managing to secure private capital, you have completed the transaction, and your TOD story is complete, meaning that you have finished the construction of your transit and the urban development around it. How many of you have achieved that? Okay, so if we were to draw a curve, you would find that most people have heard about TOD, most people are aware that it makes sense. Very few people have actually done it well, okay, because it's complicated. So what I would like to start with is to go back shortly to the history of TOD. And the history of TOD, which I call traditional TOD, was really a reaction to the fact that in the US, the suburban sprawling was dominating urban development, leading to a very inefficient way of developing cities. So Peter Calthorpe suggested to have TOD as a powerful planning strategy to achieve a well-designed, compact, mixed-use, pedestrian and at that time not bike-friendly, but later on bike-friendly urban development organized around mass transit stations. This is nice. I think you can have a nice impact on your community by doing so. But let's go one step further. Let's imagine a city where actually the city is more competitive, where you can access jobs and services easily without requiring a car, where you can move around quite easily. Let's imagine a place where you have a lot of high-quality neighborhoods where the cost of infrastructure is actually lower per unit of GDP, and the CO2 is actually lower, where you can identify those parts of high concentration and make sure that they are resilient to natural hazard. And lastly, because it's important for not only the Ministry of Finance, but the city officials, where part of it can be funded through value capture. Now, the good news is that a lot of cities have achieved that. And when you look at it, you have cities like New York that concentrate 60% of their office space on 1% of their territory, creating a lot of agglomeration benefits. You have cities like Hong Kong, where 83% of the jobs are within 1 kilometer of mass transit. Or in the US, a recent study showed that the cost spent on transport plus housing of people living near TOD is only 37% of income compared to 51% for those who are not near TOD. In terms of creating high-quality neighborhoods, I think there is a lot of example. I'm thinking about Hudson Yards that is under development, King Cross, but also a lot of developments that show that you can create a dynamic environment with a lot of public space and green areas. But more importantly, maybe, you can do that in a way that does not translate into higher emissions, higher energy consumption, even though your GDP goes up. So that's quite fundamental. And a recent study from that was carried out in Romania showed that you could, through more compact development of this type, have a 23% reduction in emissions, for example, from transport. The other important part for financiers is that this is a model that creates the densities that generates the economic opportunities to pay off part of the investment that is required. And I give the example, the well-known example of Hong Kong rail plus property model that generated 140 billion Hong Kong dollars over a 25-year period, and every year about 3 billion Hong Kong dollars. But the reality is that when you look at the long-term evolution of home value close to TOD areas or far away, you will find that in the US, over a period from 96 to 2014, you have a massive change in the value created in those neighborhoods. Essentially, the location nearby TOD increased much faster, and this is accelerating now that people tend to prefer living back in the center of the city. So a number of key principles emerge. One can always argue how to set the principles, etc., but more or less that captures the number of key principles. Aligning your human and economic densities and the mass transit capacity, considering the network characteristics of this mass transit for greater accessibility at the city level. Creating shorter commutes by having compact region. Making sure that you are creating resilience in all of these areas connected by mass transit. Planning and zoning for mixed use and mixed income neighborhoods at stations along the corridor. Creating vibrant, people-centric public space, primarily by engaging the population in conversations as to what they need. Developing neighborhoods that promote walking and biking. Developing good quality, accessible, and integrated public transit. And managing private vehicle demand to support it. Now, I shared with you on each table those principles, and those are something that I'm now going to explore looking at different scales of a city. First, the metropolitan city level scales. When you look at a city, the cities that have evolved using TOD principle for decades, you find cities like Hong Kong, where currently about 83% of jobs are within a kilometer of metro station. But also residence is at 75% from mass transit stations, which means that when they want to access a place within the city, you have created a system that is going to allow for that. The same is similar in places like New York or London. But coming to Singapore, what is important is that you can, as a city, set a vision that aspires to improve that balance. And that will be described more in details later on. But in Singapore, when you say that you want by 2030 to have 8 out of 10 households living within 10 minutes walk from a train station, it means that your urban planners, your transport planners have to work towards that objective. It sets a vision that makes them converge. So alignment or bringing the population close to the mass transit is the first solution. The second one relates to the way cities mature and transform. When you look at a city, and this is the city of Tokyo, you find that you have high points of concentration in terms of economic development. It was the same actually in the South Africa picture we saw this morning. And it is the same more or less in most of the evolved cities. You find that concentration of jobs, in this case it's jobs per square kilometers, is not uniformly distributed, but is very spiky in nature. In the case of London, our friend Serge, who has been working with us extensively, has calculated the distribution of jobs per kilometers of urban build-up. And what he shows is this high concentration that takes place. Now, it's not only in a fully developed context. In a city like Zhengzhou, where we work in China, we see a similar pattern of high concentration. But the difference is that when you look at the right picture that shows the expected evolution of densities, you see that this is a city that not only has those distributions, but those distributions are going to transform dramatically over the period 2009-2030. So this is what creates the opportunity to not only shape a neighborhood, but shape a city and its efficiency. Now, when you look at the way mature subway systems emerge, you find that they tend to converge toward a very dense core, as shown on this graph, with a number of extensions towards the suburb areas. Within that network, a number of stations play a different roles. Some are better connected than others. Some are more in the middle of different paths than others. Some are closer to the other station than others. And because of these unique network characteristics, which are similar to what you would find in the context of a computer network, you will find a number of centralities within the network, which can be to show what are the centralities within the network, then to compare those with the urban population density centralities, and see how you can gradually align for that. Now, you can imagine that in a network of this size, you are going to have very different stations, very different opportunities. So there's a need for a typology that identifies both the scale, the type of development, but also its timing. Some of it may be needed today, some of it may be needed in 20 years. But you need to plan and prepare for that. You need to be able to plan so that you can allocate limited public resources to those that create the most value, and to also communicate with private developers where you would like to see a development take place. And we'll learn more from the Marina Bay case later on, how the developers are prompted towards a certain direction. We developed a framework with Serge called the 3-value framework that looks at the node value, the place value, and the market value of stations, and attributes to that a certain number of opportunity value to maximize the economic efficiency. We have a report in the back, and it's also available on our website for further discussion. Now, having done that, you can then locate the transit-oriented areas within your city. You can decide how to concentrate densities, which one will be your primary center, secondary center, tertiary centers, and apply accordingly a set of differentiated floor area ratio increases around those stations. And I mean that because in some of the countries I've worked with, there is a statement that if you're next to a subway station, it's going to increase to 4, regardless of the significance of a station in the network. Moving to the second scale, the corridor level. The corridor level is typically what we as transport people get approached for. Oh, we want to build a metro or a BRT. How do we do that? And actually, this is where the conversation on this integration between land use and transport needs to take place. So what we look at is how do you maximize the accessibility impact on one side, we are I'm a transport person after all, while ensuring a better integration with the surrounding and a balanced mixed use along the corridor. So the integration in terms of economic integration, public transport, biking, walking networks, the green networks of parks and the cultural heritage within the city, but also an opportunity at a smaller scale than the full city to see what it takes to make it happen on a significant but not so overwhelming part of the city. Okay, so developing a set of TOD projects, ensuring that they are going to be resilient and trying to create a balance in terms of job housing balance along the line. In one of the projects we had, which we studied actually in Surabaya, that meant that looking at the corridor showed opportunity to connect some of the historical sites, some of the older types of neighborhood, connect the corridor to the river, redefine and re-intensify the development of a CBD. And doing that type of work allowed a better understanding of a fit between a transit function and an urban function in a way that brings the integrated approach that was mentioned earlier. We can also, through this kind of analysis, then define how along a corridor, different stations, it's a little bit small, but if you see the graph below the blue one, different stations offer different opportunity. And you can start estimating what is the impact in terms of job accessibility with or without TOD. Now, moving to the station level, the core principles are relatively well known, and they are not that complicated. You want to enlarge essentially the walkability around the station, make it easy to access regardless of the surroundings. Making sure that you have temperate and comfortable conditions in particular. So in a country like Singapore, that's why you need to cover some of the pathways to make it more agreeable to people. You need to promote biking wherever possible, both at the road level, but more essentially at the intersection level. You need a supportive street network that is not overwhelming, like avoiding a very large super block that make it difficult to move forward. You need to support a well-integrated quality public transit, which means that, in particular, integrating the public transit with other modes of transport. and providing proper road allocation and shelter space for this public transit to operate well. And equally important, and as learned from Singapore, you need to think about how you manage the demand for car trips. So you need, that's the other side of TOD. You need to make sure that people have a disincentive to use their car. With that, you can focus on creating vibrant, people-centric public space and plan and zone for mixed use. That means ensuring higher densities close to the transit station and the diversity of land use around the metro station in particular, while considering the needs for supporting infrastructure around the station, because more density will require more infrastructure. That will create much more value than it costs, but still it needs to be integrated. So looking at a specific station, here my colleagues from China will be happy, it's all in Chinese. You will see how you look at the station and then you decompose around a radius all the issues that need to be addressed for that station to work as per the original intent. Examples of quality environment for pedestrians, which are becoming more and more looked after by cities like Tianjin, where we work, for example. Connecting, this one is slow. Connecting a TOD area, which in this case is a railway station, to the network of parks in the city, so that you create a high quality environment. Or like in Hudson Yards, create a diversified set of densities that will allow the mixed use to take place with sometimes densities that are very elevated, like 33 in this case, so much more than the base case of 10, because developers are willing to pay for additional densities in exchange to providing the proper urban space and public space that is required in order to, they are willing to pay for more densities against inclusionary housing bonus, for example, that allows this goal of inclusive TOD to take place. Now, I'm running a couple of minutes late, but let me conclude that TOD can therefore be looked at 3 scales, okay? The metropolitan, the corridor, and the local. In the past, people have tended to focus on a TOD development, which is a single location, but for you, with your fast-growing cities, the opportunity is to elevate that. Let's not forget, nonetheless, that it's a process that takes time. Even the best countries may take 10, 15, 20 years to develop completely a TOD site. It requires a fairly strong level of institutional capacity with transparent rules. It requires good regulation, design guidelines. It needs to consider the notion of social inclusion, not necessarily at each site, but at a network level, at a corridor level, so that you create that opportunity for access to jobs and the like. And the lesson learned is that there is clearly a role for the public and a role for the private sector to be looked at. So with this, I will conclude, and we are going to now move to some very concrete example. We have the opportunity actually today to have a full range of planners, transport and urban planners, architects. And our first presentation is going to be from a city where we are actually supporting a metro development, a city that has been very progressive in terms of TOD. So let me invite Mr. Yua to the podium to present the experience of Nanchang.